But it seems that the world is horribly fragmented and difficult to understand these
Sure.
days. There's a great lack of trust. In America, politicians are at each other's throats, really. They do not seem to be able to talk together. We have all these problems on Wall Street,
Sure.
and we seem to be in the predicament of the world doesn't seem to be that nice.
Yeah, I agree that that's right. I suppose it may even possibly be true here in Iceland that the results of the economic recession were not to create a great deal of trust on the part of ordinary citizens in government. And that's very true in the United States.
Yes.
And I don't know about Iceland, but certainly in the United States, what's characteristic of this most recent period is an inability of politicians from different political parties to cooperate on the simplest things.
Yes.
And it's, frankly, it's obscene. I'm a political scientist, and I have never been more depressed in my professional life. I mean, I've been a political scientist for 50 years,
Yes.
and I've never been more depressed than I am right now
Yes.
at the state of political dialogue, or the absence of dialogue, in Washington. What caused that is not so simple to say. It's partly changes in the electoral system that have meant that politicians have an interest in appealing to the most extreme members of their own party, so that the Republican Party has to appeal to the Tea Party wing, which is a very, very conservative wing of the Republican Party, and part of it may be that just a simple level of human contact among the political leaders is declining. I'd be interested, actually, in the situation in Iceland, which is, of course, much smaller. So you think
there's a great general lack of trust, and there's among the population and among politicians are not trusted, and they are fighting like rabid dogs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if either you or I can figure out a way to end that, you or I will become a national leader. I'm counting on you to be the national leader and lead us out of this. That is a terrible situation, because the problems that America is facing, the content of the problems that we're facing, like, for example, how to balance the budget, or how to get the economy started, those are technically not complicated problems.
No.
They involve conflicts, but I and a Republican economist could sit down together and in 10 minutes could write down, okay, here's what we'd have to do. I'd have to make some sacrifices. You'd have to make some sacrifices. That's the way we work in our ordinary life. My wife and I, we've been married for almost 50 years. We don't agree on everything. Often we really have strong disagreements. Should we spend a week in Iceland, or should we not spend a week in Iceland? We're going to, because we're eager to spend this week here in Iceland. But when we disagree about where to take vacations, of course we disagree, but then we sort of sit down and work out a deal. Well, why can't political leaders do the same thing? It's not complicated.
Yeah. But people also feel that they are disempowered, that they are not in control of their lives, and that there are powers beyond us, of course, the financial magnates that are really controlling our lives.
Well, I don't quite agree about that, actually. I think, of course, financial influences are important. Of course they are. But I don't actually think that there is some secret power up there that is controlling all of this. I think the problem is there isn't any secret power up there that's controlling all of this. It's that we are stuck here like two scorpions in a bottle. We have to, that is, I'm speaking inside the country. There are many Republicans, and they're not going to go away, and there are many Democrats, and they're not going to go away, and yet we have to collaborate. And for the most part, in American history, that has not been impossible. We're right now in American history in the most bitter conflict about domestic politics, I mean, since the Civil War.
Yes.
And I wish I could be more optimistic, frankly. But I think it's going to require a much greater level of maturity on the part of our leaders. I have to say, and this will sound perhaps partisan, because I am a progressive Democrat, I think Obama himself has bent over backwards to try to have an adult dialogue, and I think some Republican leaders would like to do that.
Yes.
But because of the strength of this far right movement in the Tea Party, it's as much a religious movement, actually, as it is a political movement, as it is an economic movement. who refuse all compromise. Obama, every time he's tried to make some kind of a deal with the Republicans, the Republican leadership have had to back down because they couldn't get support within their own caucus.
But you have been writing a lot about religion, and it seems that you think that religion is not all that negative a force in society, because many scientists of your ilk would be rather secularist, atheists, and they would say religion is not good. But
sure.
you do not agree with that.
Well, no. I mean, it's not what my personal views are. Actually, don't matter here about religion. I'm trying, as a social scientist, to investigate scientifically what are the consequences for good and for ill of religion. Obviously, you don't have to look very far around the world to see that places that are deeply religious and deeply divided in religious terms often are places of mayhem.
Yes.
Belfast or Bosnia or Beirut or Baghdad or Bombay. America happens to be fortunate in that although Americans on average are far more religious than most other industrialized or advanced countries, and although we are divided in religious terms, we're actually much more tolerant of religious differences in America than you would think, and actually much more tolerant than people in other countries are tolerant of religious differences. That's partly because, again, it's a social capital story. What's happened over the last 50 years, even though we've become divided in the so-called culture wars about abortion and homosexuality and so on, at the same time in our private lives, the degree of personal connection across religious lines, for example, the degree of intermarriage across religious lines, has risen very sharply. And so in personal terms now, the average American has close family and close friends in other religions. It's hard to demonize Catholics or Jews or Mormons or whatever if you actually know, love one of them. And that's I think our good fortune. We've also found in our research, and this was a little bit of a surprise to us, that religious people are on average better neighbors and better citizens and more generous and more altruistic in their behavior than matched secular people. The average religious person in America, I'm actually myself not all that religious, but the average religious person in America, it turns out, is 2 or 3 times more likely to volunteer not just for church causes, but for secular causes than a secular person is. 2 or 3 times more likely to take part in movements for social justice as well as for other things. So I think religion is a powerful medicine. Taken in high doses, it can be lethal. But it also has some powerful effects on a society, and not all of them bad, as many intellectuals in Europe, especially in Europe, are inclined to argue.
Yes. Well, you've advised a lot of famous people, American presidents, Clinton, Obama, George Bush, and you even saw Gaddafi once, I think.
And Tony Blair, and Gordon Brown, and David Cameron, and Sarkozy, yes.
Yes, but I would like to ask you, of course you haven't been in Iceland for a long time and you don't know Iceland a lot, but this is a small society that suffered an economic collapse, and we are having demonstrations this weekend, and just some small observations on where to go for Iceland.
I don't know Iceland well. I do know that Iceland has historically had some great advantages. I'm not talking about geothermal energy. I'm talking about the fact that this is a small society on an island with high levels of what I would call social capital.
Yes.
That is to say, it's social solidarity here. My understanding is that social solidarity here in Iceland has historically been quite high. That's a powerful asset for a community. It's an asset that Iceland shares with some of the countries of Scandinavia, this high degree of social solidarity. I don't have any good suggestions about how to solve the intense level of political conflict here now. There are lots of parallels as I've arrived here. There are lots of parallels between politics in Iceland and politics in America today. Namely, that one party is in power.
Yes.
That an opposition party came to office as a result of the economic collapse. That's true in America. It's true here.
Yes.
And now owns the problem and is getting blamed for the problem that it did not actually create.
Yes.
Maybe we can all gradually, in Iceland and the United States, gradually the economic stability will return and we can regain our sense of maturity.
Yes.
I do think that the fundamental challenge in America, and maybe in Iceland, is to recreate a sense in the country that we're all in this together. That actually we share, all of us, well, of course we have disagreements, but that we share more common interests than our politicians are currently allowing us to recognize.
Yes. Because this all seems so undignified as well.
It's undignified, and at least in America, what it means is we're not actually solving public problems that could be solved.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for being on this program. It's a pleasure having you, Robert.
Thank you very much.
And your lecture is at the university on Monday at 12 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.